It's a guy, a car, and a podcast.
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 Buckle up.
Buckle up.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, y'all.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
Too good, Michael. How are you?
Too good.
Sir?
Wow, I don't know if I'm too good. I'm good. It's been a good day. It's been a busy day, but yeah, too good. I mean, you know what? I have to say, I every single day I mention how lucky I am of the position that I'm in. So I know there's so many people out there that are not in, that are really struggling right now. While this episode's being recorded, we're still in the middle of the pandemic situation. So I do remind myself every day. So you know what? Why not? Too good. Sure. I'm also too good.
So yeah, I love to exist in the podcast sphere, and in Arizona anyway, I don't know a ton of people doing it. So it's also just kind of fun to connect with somebody that is in this universe, because I think any of us that listen to podcasts, we listen to people in LA and New York or wherever they're doing it that are touring or famous for whatever reason. And so to them, the podcast is kind of something they do, like a side hustle. Whereas for me, I think it's kind of become the main way that people have any idea who I am, if they do at all. So to have some, and I think that's just an Arizona thing. I feel like Arizona has the potential to be this amazing entertainment sphere, and it just isn't for some reason. Like there's a lot of really talented artists here that just kind of seem to be on the couch. And I don't know that I've ever figured that out in the decades that I've lived here.
It's something that I think about all the time too. And what I realize is I feel that we still need more support for music in Arizona. And what I mean by that is more record labels and more management companies and more recording studios. And we have some amazing management companies, record labels, and recording studios in our state, but I think we need more of them. We need more of that business structure, if you will, to help guide artists. Because you're right. I think there is an abundance of talent here, which we're really, really lucky. Yeah. But I don't think it has enough of a support structure yet to really get it. And that's why I like doing these interviews and to talk to people about the music business, because I'm hoping that somebody gets inspired and then wants to start another record label, which is kind of funny to talk about because I'm like, why am I encouraging more competitors out there, right? But the thing is, though, is that I don't see other record labels as direct competitors, because the way I see it is that there's so much music that's out there, and that if we're able to team up with other labels and to share resources or to collaborate on different types of things, then to me that creates a multi-win scenario, which I'm a big believer in.
Which I think feeds into, I was reading up specifically on 80/20 records, and the whole, is it Pareto principle that you guys are kind of based on, really fascinates me, in the sense that I conceptualize it in a Wikipedia sense. I'm like, okay, so the littlest things make the most output or something, but can you expand on that? Because it fascinates me, and I'm guessing you can make it make more sense than me.
Yeah, it blew my mind. It was about I think my senior year of college that I found out about this principle, and it just amazed me. And it really made me rethink on a lot of different subjects. And one of the things is the fact that not all things are created equal. It really dawned on me, that fact, is that not everything is created equally. And that's what the 80/20 principle essentially is about, is that in business specifically, they mentioned that it's been proven over and over again that 20% of your customers make up 80% of your revenue. So, because there are certain customers that will pay for more money, for more things or added features, or
the hyper fans are the ones that are
fans. Yeah, rolling it back into music, the hyper fans will take out. Well, that 20% will be 80% of what comes in for you.
Wow.
And so it just kind of opened my mind up to all these different things and saying, wow, that there's so much time that's being wasted on all these other things, or things that are just simply not working, that we really focus our attention to. And reality is that there are core things that really make up the most. And it really taken that idea and concept to heart in in everything that we do in 80/20 Records, not just
Mm-hmm.
for the fact that we give 80% of royalties to our artists because we felt that they should get the lion's share. But on
Mhm.
top of that too is like, how do we do things as effectively and efficiently as possible internally so that we can give 80% of what we make back to artists?
Do you feel, based on that kind of mission statement, that I mean, you're 12 years in, if I understand that correctly, so you started back in '08. Do you think that you started what you're doing at the perfect time, in the sense of where like technology and a band's saturation was, or did you get started with this thing and apps just started popping up everywhere and was it like overwhelming, or do you think you got started at a time where that sort of was very organic and natural for you to be like, yeah, I know exactly what these things are and I know how to utilize them?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because before I started the record label, I actually had a app website that I built before that. It was called Indie Radio, and it was a website where we hosted our own internet radio stations, and we had musicians upload their music to our site, and then we automatically put them into rotation. They just selected what genre. We had a different genre for each station, automatically put them in rotation for that station. So this was like right before it was just now I know you've been in the scene for a while, so you'll get this. This was when Last.fm was called Audio Scrobbler. And when Pandora was mostly known as the Music Genome Project.
Oh yeah, wow.
Remember those? So I had this idea back then because I was listening to in high school with Winamp and listening to all the internet radio stations, and at the time they were mostly like EDM stations, which I really liked, but I was like, I wanted more than just, like, where's the other genres of music?
Yeah.
And so in college, I came up with that idea of what if we hosted our own radio stations that automatically put into rotation, and we just created this environment for musicians. And so we built it. It took about 2 years to build because it was myself and my buddy on the weekends. I was going to ASU, he was going to U of A. So it was literally just whenever we had spare time outside of being a full-time student and also working part-time too. Okay. And so we did release it, and it did really well. But by that point, Pandora's huge. Last.fm is ginormous at this point. So we got kind of lost in the mix pretty quickly. So if you will, to the long-winded version of answering your question is that it was, I feel like a natural progression, because my business partner and I decided that with indie radio, we either had to shift to another direction, or we had to come up with something new. And then that's when he popped, why don't we just start a record label up? And that's how it kind of started. So it was just more of a less of, we weren't sure really what else to do at that point in time, and a record label sounded like an interesting idea.
And yet I have to imagine the difference between scouring the local scene or wherever you were getting the music and just asking them, can I please play your music on my internet radio station, which really doesn't cost them anything but exposure, and actually starting a record label. That sounds a lot more daunting than starting a website that plays music.
But the funny part is that I still had to pull teeth on trying to get musicians to upload the music to the website. In fact, it was funny because I went to a recording studio class at ASU, and one of my classmates was in this band, and I loved their music. I listened. We went to a recording studio once, and he played it. I really liked it, so I bought one of his CDs, and I was like, it was like the one CD in my car for a long time, just playing that album over and over again. And I begged him to put it up on indie radio, and it took months to get him to finally do it. And it was so funny.
It was more just getting a lazy musician off the couch. It wasn't about like licensing rights or anything like that.
No. It was just basically he just wanted,
Yeah.
he just wasn't getting around to it. And I get it. Like, I'm just like, I'm a classmate, and I'm like begging him because I love this music so much.
Yeah.
So he finally did by the end of the semester. And lo and behold, about a year later, circumstance ended up that I saw them, like him again and his band, and they became the second band I signed on 80/20 Records.
Is that the pop punk band, the Tempe pop punk bands referred to on the site?
That was Click 60, which was my first. I don't know if you know them or not, because I know you were in the pop punk scene. So Click 60 was our first artist, band specifically. And then the second band was a band called 42 Eternal. I don't know if you know them or not.
No, which is so. I mean, I'm like East Mesa, so I guess maybe I get a little I get stuck in a bubble of that where we didn't really tour. Like there was just a variety of venues out there in East Mesa and like Tempe and stuff. And I think we just kind of stuck to that. Like if you went out to Phoenix to play a show, it was kind of a big deal because we just had like all of our little internal Mesa scene shows. So I just get kind of caught up with like the Heartless and Curbside High and Spindle and just like the East Side bands is where my head's at for the most part.
Yeah, because you've been in it for a while too in the music scene, right? In the Arizona music scene.
Mm-hmm.
How long you been in it for?
I guess 2004 was the first punk band I joined. Already Lost. Oh,
excellent. Yeah, you're before my time. I mean, I really didn't get into the scene until like you said around 2008 when I started 8020. So you've been in it for a little while. What have you noticed has been the most major changes in the past 16 years?
You know, I don't know that this would apply to every single instance of where bands go, but it seems like, and maybe this like comes down to like the conservative red state vibe of Arizona, but it just seems like everyone kind of just settled down and started families and just weren't in bands anymore. So like Four Banger and just all these bands that were kind of breaking through, and you'd heard them on like The Edge's like night shows where they play independent music and stuff. Bands that seem to be making their way, just they enjoyed doing it, but they always had other plans. And so they just like kind of moved on with their lives. And then in the absence of really talented people doing their thing, like rap and screamo just took over seemingly overnight, to the point that me still being in like pop alternative rock bands, pop punk bands, pop hardcore bands, we just looked ridiculous on a bill because everybody else was just playing this stuff that was nothing like us. And then, from coming from a place feeling like I owned the scene, like we were the scene, to just being a minority, an intense minority in a scene that just didn't even feel familiar, didn't feel like Arizona anymore. I'm like, what are we, New Mexico? When did this happen? I don't know. So yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
It went through a lot of different phases. I also remember too that back in I would say the early 2010s, that's when the indie scene really started coming out, was during that time frame. So also I saw that hardcore kind of took a little, and especially pop punk kind of took a little bit of a backseat. And then there was a lot more of these indie type bands that were coming and forming back in the early 2010s. And it's always interesting to see how the Arizona music scene has evolved and changed, and you'll see these kind of throwbacks happen too. Like once in a while, like you'll see like, oh, all of a sudden like pop punk's a thing again, and like and then you see a whole bunch of bands cropping up. And the other thing I want to mention too is when you mentioned about age, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but I've noticed that there's usually about 3 moments in people's lives that are these milestones for having a music career. So if you started in high school, there's the high school phase where getting a band together and stuff like that too. You may there are some cases where people really make it far even in high school, but it's usually like your beginning stages. And then college hits, and that is a major milestone for a lot of people because again, a lot of them are now either going away for college. They might be focusing on other things. They're now thinking more of a different type of career at this point. They may not decide that music's not part of not as a major priority right now. Some of them even at that point are considering, getting married and having a family, for sure. Even, in their early 20s. So a lot of times there's that moment of clarity as far as what's important to them. And then after college, so mid 20s, same reasons. Now they're either looking for a full-time job, they're starting a family now at this point. So again, they're reassessing what's important to them. And then same thing's true when you hit 30, because at that point, you've usually been in it for at least 10 years or so, or something along those lines. And then you are really deciding upon, okay, I'm now in my 30s. Can I still keep this up? If this is the kind of lifestyle that I want to continue having, do I really have a shot at doing what I ultimately want to do, make a career out of this, or should I change, shift? And it's really interesting to see that. I see that almost over and over again with artists, and I think that's important to understand, especially as a band, because I mean you've been in a couple of bands, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you witnessed the same thing where you had bandmates that their priorities changed. They had they had a family, they got married, they got a huge job offer, whatever the case is, and so forth. And to me, it's important to understand that this is not necessarily always forever, and that it's likely that people will move on and do other things, and that should be understood and be okay with that fact.
Yeah, and I feel like as a record label management company, I feel like you have that conversation with bands a lot, which is such a healthy conversation to have, because unless someone tells you you need to expect this, you need to have your seatbelt fastened for if and when this happens, it's like it's like getting broken up by a hot girlfriend over and over again. Where like when you sit down in band practice, all of you talk about getting signed and getting on tour and being buddies with story of the year, and like just you talk about whatever your dream is. And because we're not mind readers, like you can't fathom what's going on under their motivations, where they're like, oh yeah, it'd be cool if we did that, but I'm also over here working on my degree, and maybe I'm getting serious with my friend, and maybe stuff I'm not telling you guys about because we're at band practice. Why would I mention that? But then eventually they do. At some point they're like, so I'm moving to Chicago with my girl, and you guys are awesome, but this was fun. And all of us are sitting there on all the work we've been doing on social media, on all the emails that we've had out, like taking this band seriously, and all of a sudden the thing just eviscerates. And it's one thing for that to happen once. It's a whole other thing for that to happen like 8 times in your music career. And I think that has, I've kind of left music a couple of times in my life because it just gets old. I mean, it's already hard enough to lug your hundreds of pounds of music equipment from venue to venue, from venue to your practice space, from venue to your practice space, from venue to your practice space, to the studio, to your practice space. And then it's like the only thing keeping you motivated that whole time are the possibilities, are where you're going. And when somebody just takes a hard right off of that page when they hadn't really said anything to you about it before that moment, it's such a weird betrayal. And I think it's the only thing that makes me understand why, as an example, somebody that to me it really blew my mind watching him like step away from music is Brian Champ, the first drummer of Greeley Estates. He might not have been the first, but he was the prominent one, the one that toured with him and stuff. When I saw him like leave Greeley and basically localize himself, and he ended up starting a family, to me that like blew my brain open, because I wasn't assuming that Greeley was like this big rich rock band, but in my mind I was like, you had the dream. Was it not good enough? Was it awful? Were you just sleeping on couches? What was so bad that you're like, I'm exhausted, I want out of this? And then on top of that, dude starts another band within the last like year or two called Coyote Tango that's awesome. And he was in back to what you were saying about the indie movement. He was in this band called Bears of Manitou that was really like this very indie band.
Yep, I love Bears of Manitou. They're fantastic.
They're great. But I'm sitting there watching Brian doing this and thinking about him being on YouTube in music videos like that have hundreds of thousands and millions of views. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around, like, that's what I think I want right now. But I think I want it because I've never tasted it. You've tasted it for years. And now that you've seen the inside of it, you think you realize you want something different for your life. And it's that kind of stuff that just blows my mind. Like people's evolution as artists and as people, and how those two things aren't like mutually exclusive, I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what the other person's going through. Who, that's the thing, is that you don't know, if are they having any kind of, personal changes, personal issues. I mean, the musician lifestyle is not for everybody, and the musician lifestyle also isn't for everybody at forever either. Some people love that musician lifestyle, and some people after a while it can get tiresome and they want to move on to other things. And I think that's an okay thing. And sometimes you said it before about, it's funny about getting dumped by a hot girl every single time, and but it's like it is a relationship that you have with your bandmates, and relationships do change too. Sometimes better, sometimes not so better. It's just like any other relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship, that those things change and evolve, and sometimes you grow apart. And that might be the other thing too, is that they may not necessarily be no longer interested in music. They just may no longer feel the passion and the camaraderie that they had in their current bandmates before. And that's just a very human thing. And I agree with you. Sometimes it's so good to have that communication. I think that's the number one key thing, is that you have to communicate with each other and be honest about what you want out of things. Like, what do you want out of what do you want out of if you're in a band, what do you want out of the band? What kind of involvement do you want to have in it? Because just because that you have that one band member that's like, yeah, let's do this and so forth, the other one's like, I just want to play, I just want to play shows. I just like to play shows, and that's my thing. And there's no right or wrong way. It's just that you got to talk about those things.
Out of curiosity, like with my experience of going through that as a member of the band and just kind of dealing with my own process there, with you as the record label and or management party of the situation there, you stand to lose a lot more if someone changes their mind and bails out of a project than the other band members, I would think, because you're putting time into it that you don't get the stimulus of being on stage and having thousands of people screaming and that sort of like you don't get the same like notoriety or recognition. You're very behind the scenes. So based on that, to me, it feels like you're risking a lot more. Do you take security inside of like contracts or sort of like trying to gently hold people down to agreements, or do you find yourself okay with people and their their changes and evolution?
That's a really good question. The way I see it is, at the end of the day, these are people, and that if there's something that gets changed and so forth, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that projects have gone under because band member has left, or they changed their mind, and where they weren't happy with the result, or some whatever with the album or the recording or the music video, whatever the case is. And what I've learned is that at the end of the day, we have to support them in whatever decisions that they feel is best for their craft, and as well as for their lives. And even if it comes at an inconvenience for us, the reality is there's really not much that can be done about it. They have commitments and things like that too, and so forth. And we just hope that if that's the decision that they make that decision responsibly, is the only real thing that we hope for in that case scenario. And that's why we diversify. That's why we have a roster of artists, and that's why we're always busy with multiple different projects, because the reality is that at any point in time, just like that, a project could be gone for X, Y, and Z reasons. So it comes with the territory. I mean, we're a very risk-based business. I mean, that's the nature of it. And I knew that this would be the case, and that there would be just things that will work out and some things that don't work out.
There's a lot of things about what I assume that you do that are very mysterious, and I'm curious about, in the sense that I'm an independent artist, and so everything that's getting done, whether it be making records or music videos, which I haven't got into yet, to even just podcasting as sort of a leg of having a band or presenting or marketing it. I think about you booking tours and setting up music videos, setting up studio time, and I read a little bit about how like you crowdfund some of that and what have you. But I guess it's the financial side of that spins my brain, because especially with the roster that you have, maybe it just comes down to careful planning and budgeting your time, not just budgeting the finances, like spreading things out and using the revenue and profits from one band to benefit the next, and just kind of pooling it in a I can't even think of a good example, but I'm just wondering, like, when you started the label 12 years ago, like, did you go in cold? I know you mentioned, I think the other guy got like a book for
that was me.
Music. Was that you?
That
you
was
got
me.
the book about licensing and then marketing. And
Yep.
Did you literally just like out of a couple books for dummies, like just invent this thing, or
Yep.
was there? Wow.
Yep. That was it. I had no idea. I just, it's one of those things where I look back and I'm like, man, that was really stupid, but I have no regrets. I have no regrets whatsoever. But man, like,
why do you say it's stupid? 12 years later, why do you think it's stupid?
Because honestly, if I look back, I should have gotten an internship at another company, or found some sort of mentor that can show me the ropes about what the music industry is like, and to
which is ironic because you guys have a very unique mission statement. So you would think interning somewhere else, you're basically just going to bring all of their ideals into your company.
which is why I have no regrets, because who knows what 820 Records would be if I went down that road. So that's why, I mean, you can go all the way around, but at the same token, that was probably one thing at least I would explore it a little bit further. Now, knowing this information now, I probably would have saved myself a lot of headache, at least with making a lot of mistakes that I did. But I'm also the kind of person that learns the hard way. Usually the hardest lessons are the ones that stick.
Yeah.
So again, I have no regrets whatsoever, but yeah, I just was like, yeah, sure, why not? I was hungry and I wanted to do something, so I just got those 2 books, one on music law because I figured I should understand the law aspect of things, and then I remember the record label marketing book, and I still have it. Is that I went through it and then I went, okay, yep, those things make sense. These things don't really make as much sense anymore, and these things I can't do, so we're just gonna figure something else out because I can't do that. And then after I was done reading, there was a sample contract in the book, so I grabbed that. And I had a friend of mine who's both my business partner and myself was a friend who did EDM music. And we're like, hey, we have no idea what we're doing, but here's a sample contract we found in a book. We're going to figure out how to get you in iTunes. He goes, okay, signs the contract. And that was it. Like, we told him, like, you're our guinea pig. We have no idea what we're doing. We're just going to figure things out.
With your 12 years of experience in, could you tell me how irresponsible / stupid it is that I hang my entire knowledge of music law on the simple idea that to establish a copyright argument, all you need is a file with a date stamp on it. That's it. That's all you need. This was my idea first.
That is not stupid. That actually is a thing that is suggested. I would say these days, I would just go, if you are really concerned about the copyright, just go to the copyrights.gov's website. It's actually not that difficult to do, and it's inexpensive, like $50-$60, and you could do like several songs at once that you could go ahead and copyright. Yeah. So it's actually, they make it way, like before it was a huge headache, but these days, yeah, I mean, honestly, walking through an artist took maybe like half hour to an hour tops to just go ahead and just, check everything off and then, put everything through, and yeah, $50-$60, and that's it. And you can do like a collection of songs at once, and that's the way you kind of can work things out. So you can do like an entire album. So if you have like multiple albums, it's like maybe $50-$60 per album.
How highly do you recommend that? I mean, how litigious is the music industry these days? Is it really like it feels like it's probably a lot more cost than what you're going to get out of the argument?
My colleagues will probably kill me if I say anything, but it's very important.
Okay. Good to know. Okay.
I would say it doesn't take you long to do it. It's not like
like wearing a mask during COVID. Like, it ain't costing you anything. Just wear the freaking mask.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to be protective. I will say that it's also important too, because there's an important law that's still trying to get passed called the Case Act. And the Case Act is very important because what it does is it creates a small claims court specifically for copyright infringement.
Wow.
And there's no lawyers involved, so it's not like you can technically, if let's say Warner release a song that was infringing on your copyright, you can bring Warner to the small claims court, and they can't use their resources and lawyers. Like, it basically, you submit your claim, they submit their defense, and then there's a judge that basically decides who wins in that case. So it completely eliminates the money out of the situation, as well as, and so it keeps everybody on a level playing field.
Is that the intent of it? It was just trying to level the playing field of like, but I feel like the only thing that is hip hop the only, I guess besides maybe EDM, that's really like sampling to the point that copyright infringement would even be a thing?
Sampling is just one, but if somebody took your lyrics, your melodies, that's all copyright infringement. There's somebody used your song. Let's say a company used your song without your permission.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's infringement too. So before, there's very little recourse. The copyright, copyright law. I think there's like one, like if you really wanted to have a copyright dispute, there's like one judge that does all the copyright in the entire country. And it's insane. So you just never get anywhere. And then otherwise you're just in this gigantic legal battle that's going to cost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which for small businesses is never worth it. So this is what the Case Act was to resolve, is to give a ability for small businesses, include, and I say small businesses because this is not just about music. This is about, photography as well. I mean, photography is a big one. Film is another one. Like anything that has to do with copyright, this covers. So it's designed to help protect creators, so that if somebody else is abusing that craft, whether it's utilizing it on a commercial level without permission, or which, for photography that happens all the time with images. So it protects you from that, protects you from people, because let's face it, the likelihood of somebody taking your lyrics and your music, unless you're like in the industry where you're like where you're a prominent songwriter, chances are that's probably not going to happen, just because there's so much music out there. But the same token too is that you still want to protect yourself, because you never know what what things are going to go down the lines. And also you want to protect yourself too, because in case that somebody comes across your music and then all of a sudden you sing it in a commercial or somebody's, whatever the case is, and you didn't get any kind of compensation for that or even permission to use it, you want to make sure that you're able to defend your work.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, not to change the subject too aggressively, but from an A&R perspective, I have a props to give you, and then just a expansive question, because in my doing a little bit of research on you, I saw something that made me delightfully happy. So a long time ago, I had a friend who was pretty close with this local band called Frequis, and
I love Frequis.
like
they're
all the
amazing.
time.
I love those guys.
And in one of the times that I went and saw them, there was a band opening for them called Bear Ghost that blew my head off of my shoulders. Like, not even just for the fact that their music is just really eclectic and just crazy, but also for the fact that they played like a song from the Jungle Book, like the I Want to Be Like You song. Like,
I love when they do
totally
that. It's
rocked
so
out
good.
version of it. It was so great. And then I saw that they were in your roster, so I kind of, first of all, props for getting them. Second of all, what's the story about how you got Bear Ghost?
So funny thing about Bear Ghost. So I saw them for the first time at the Rebel Lounge, and same reaction. I said, where did these guys come from? Like, it just like came out of nowhere.
Yes.
And I was like so blown away. So I kept an eye on them for a while. I think this was right when, I think just before Blaster Peace came out, if I remember correctly. Or it was like right when Blaster Peace came out. And so I just kept my eye on them so far. I didn't know the guys or anything like that, but just, wanted to keep them on my radar. And then I had, so the first interaction with them. So one of the things that 820 Records does every year is the Guilty Pleasure Show. And what the Guilty Pleasure Show is that we get artists to do all covers of what you consider guilty pleasure songs.
So good.
Which could be anything.
Yes.
We had bands do all Disney songs. We had bands do like Britney Spears and Spice Girls, but we also had like them doing like classic rock songs. It was like all over the place, and it was one of my favorite things to do every year.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why we do it is because it's a way for me to work with other bands. So the bands don't always usually know this or not, but sometimes when I invite, not all the time, but sometimes when I invite an artist to be on the Guilty Pleasure Show, is because I want to see how they work, because I want to see, okay, are they responsive to emails? Are they, do they show up on time? How seriously do they take this? Do they really practice hard, or they just kind of wing it? Those kind of things, they tell me a lot about them as a band, and not necessarily specifically for working with them in the future, like directly, but just in general, seeing, okay, like, is this a band that I would like to have on, like, to suggest to my artists to be on the lineup in the future, that we know that they're reliable, they're going to promote the show, they're going to take it seriously, those type of things. With Bear Ghost, like that, they were on my radar, so I wanted to start building relationship with them. So did the show, blew me away. Like, I mean, it was just an amazing, just amazing show, and it got me to talk to Maddox, their manager, and just to get to know him better too, and where those things are at. And even from that point, it took about a year or two after that before we ended up signing. And that was a lot of checking, just back and forth, checking in with each other, seeing whatever everyone's up to. I got to learn more about Maddox, and I have to give props to Maddox because he's such an amazing manager to that band. And that band, not only are they incredible musicians, but Maddox is the one behind the scenes that has really made Bear Ghost what it is now. And
Wow.
so I give him a lot of credit. He's definitely I very much respect him in the music community. He's one of the top people that I respect in
That's
general,
interesting.
period. So knowing that they had somebody like him also really made my decision that I really like to represent these guys, because I knew that they had somebody who's a really good manager that's going to help them, guide them through, and that I was going to be there as label support to be a support for not only the band but also for him too, so that he can continue doing a good job being a manager to them.
And sort of in connection to that story, in the podcast you did with Andrew Auxier from Orange, like you were telling the story, I don't remember the name of the band, but how you had met the band and really like enjoyed their music, but really enjoyed hanging out with them and felt like you could do something for them. I think you might have right up front offered to like represent them. They're like, no, but then you maintained a relationship and helped them from time to time as best you could. And as I was hearing that story, like, I guess I have it in my brain. I have like this self-worth issue where I feel like if we're not just hitting the ground running in a bound relationship of working together, that you're probably not going to talk to me very much. And that's probably just a self-esteem thing where it's like, no, I mean, you can have like loose relationships with people and be loosely networked, but listening to that story and how eventually they did sign on with you, from what I understand, specifically because of the work that you put in. And they were like, we have evidence, like empirical evidence of this guy just helping us when he didn't have to, that shows us that this would be a valuable relationship. I'm curious, maybe on like a macro level, with all the artists that you are sort of on your radar versus the ones that are actually in your, pantheon, like how do you determine what phase of the relationship you're in with them? Do you need to determine the relationship and call it something? Do you have like this wicked Excel spreadsheet with all people with different spaces, or are you just a really organic person relationship wise, and you just, when the time comes, and it's time to sit down and throw some, something big at them?
Ironically, all the above.
Okay.
All the above.
Wow.
We do keep track. We do keep tabs of who's doing things in town. That's a big part of it, because we want to see who's very active, and because artists have to realize that when we represent an artist, the artist has to bring something to the table, and we don't mean that in a way that is selfish to us. We mean that in a way that we can't provide value to you unless you have something to bring to the table we can use.
That's a good point.
And that's the thing, is like, I would love to help every single artist out there, but we're a business at the end of the day. We can't. So we have to, especially for, representing on the label side of things, or even management side of things, is that because it's 100% risk. So we have to assess that risk. But at the same token too, we are doing an artist a disservice if we're bringing them on board when they're not ready yet for representation, because we could, that if we're reaching out to, for whether it's, finding other kinds of opportunities for them, we know that what those other people are looking for. And if they don't have, solid recorded music and a decent following of some sort, or something that shows that there's interest there, there's nothing we can do. Like, the best we can do is just be a guide at that point. And that's why we created coaching, for that exact reason, was to do that part where an artist is at that stage where they still need work to build themselves up for representation. So that's what we created the coaching program, is for that exact reason. But yeah, I like to also mention too, because, artists mention from time to time mentioned about how you get signed on a record label and so forth.
Yeah.
And I tell them, don't. I said, don't have the goal of signing to a record label. Make it make sense. That's where the organic part comes in, is that it should be, it's about building your team. You should have a team, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean a record label. A record label could be part of the team, but it doesn't have to be. Your goal should be what it's going to take to grow what you're creating, and to surround your people that are going to support you. And that can mean lots of different things. I like to say that out of all these years, 12 years, I've only signed one artist that is submitted to us. One.
Wow. Like off the pile. That's interesting.
Only one. And that's because they were already on my radar. They just beat me to the punch and reaching out to me instead of me reaching out to them.
Which looks good too. And you make a really good point back there that frankly is probably my biggest flaw or weakness, because of all the bands that I've been in, like, I've been writing my own music the whole time, and so at some point I like put a carbon footprint out there of me called Evening the Score, all one word, and I've been developing it ever since then and been putting out more and more music. But the issue is my first EP, Delusions, was done in a studio, so it's got a pretty nice studio sound to it. The first full length came in 2018, so like 7 years after the first EP, and it was at a time where I just didn't have like the money, but I did have an iPad with GarageBand, and I did have like different tools, MIDI keyboards and stuff like that, where I could do things like drums and whatever, and I had like a way to plug a microphone in so I could mic a cab and stuff. So I literally just made an album with an iPad, and I can still listen to it, and I can still think the songs are strong, and I can still think that I did the best that I could with what I had. And I've made another album since then on an iMac, but still just kind of in Logic and still just all inside the thing. And I think hearing you say that makes me think, I don't know, it makes it easier for me to say something to myself like, that was the wrong move. You should have waited and you should have raised the money and did it in the studio. But at the same time, part of me thinks I would have never done it. And is it better that the thing just exists, even in maybe kind of a rough demo format as the final product? Or that I just sit around all the time and be like, well, if it's never going to attract label attention, or if I can't build a band around it, why should I do it? I guess I'm wondering about your thoughts about that. Like,
You're correct on the latter. Is the fact that I'd rather see artists release music, even if it's in home studio, than not release anything at all. You're just holding yourself back if you're not doing those things. Now, to expect that,
say that, that's good.
Not to expect that a label's going to go ahead and pick it up. I mean, that's probably a different story, because like that's a very different thing. But you don't have to. The whole point right now is, right now, like, let's put it this way: how much have you learned by doing those 2 EPs on your own?
A lot, but less than I feel like I should have. Because I mean, when I hear people start talking about like compression and all these different like post-production things, it spins my head, and my math brain gets really intimidated, and I just shrink from it. But the truth is, as far as I understand it, that's the magic. That's what'll give you a nice round radio sound, is if you can figure out how to properly compress and how to master. Like, you don't have to pay somebody thousands of dollars to master your release. You can just YouTube like people telling you the tricks, and then you do it. But I think I just came from like this. Me and my buddy used to play with like his Tascam 4-track like audio cassette recorder, and we would just record, lazy whatever demos into it. And I think I just come from this headspace of just plug and play. And it doesn't have to like just get, the basic tone on the guitar, whatever. Like, overthinking it means it'll never happen. Because I know so many genius musicians that overthink things to the point that they never see the light of day because they just can't be comfortable with it. So for me, I'm like, get it out there, get it out there, get it out there. Set a deadline. Don't be so desperate to have this like Nirvana Nevermind product that you just never get your stuff out there. So yes, I have learned stuff, but I also feel like I'm really lazy in the learning side. It wouldn't hurt me to like take some classes and stuff. But I guess at the end of the day, I think, is the product going to be really that much better? And it's hard for me to have that argument in my head and be like, I don't know.
Well, the thing, Adam, is like, think about it this way, is that, how long did it take you to get good at your instrument? It takes years.
Yeah.
Producing's the same thing. It's a skill. It takes years. You only you learned a lot, but you also recorded only 2 EPs.
Right. Yeah.
So it takes time to build that skill set. But think about it. If you are able to now self-produce, that gives you a lot of capabilities, especially, if you don't have like a gigantic budget, which most musicians don't, to be able to self-produce and at least produce something, and as you get better and better and better, right. That makes it, that's going to make it a lot easier for you to go back into the studio, because now you understand the process better and you know how to better prepare yourself. You can create better demos for a producer if you want to. I mean, or you end up that you get to the point where your equipment and, and your skills are good enough where you're just releasing it on your own and it's commercial ready. So, that's the thing to think about, is that, maybe you feel like you still need to learn a lot. And you're right. You probably do. You still got a long way to go.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that if you didn't put the effort in to figure out how to record yourself and at least understand the basics and get something out the door, you wouldn't even be where you're at now.
It's true. Which frankly doesn't feel all that far. I guess that the truth is, like, I like what I do, and I listen to my own music from time to time just for enjoyment, because I write the kind of stuff that I wish was still around, like 90s rock kind of stuff. But it is a little weird to me to experience a real deficit of people finding me or listening to what I do. Like, I promote it through social media and stuff. And unfortunately, that really just hits kind of my friend base and maybe a little then some. But what's really kind of spinning my head over the last few years is, and I don't know if like Netflix is to blame for this and binging or what it is, but like, I think people are a lot less interested in engaging with something new that didn't come from a major outlet. Like, but I don't know if I'm wrong about that. Like, independent music, I've got buddies that put out stuff and I watch their play counts, and it's just not that high. And I'm thinking to myself, it costs you 3 minutes and you might actually like it. Like, why not listen to it? If my friends put out something, even if I hate it, I'll go listen to it and I'll be like, oh, well, now I won't listen to it again. But where it's really like just sparking my curiosity is maybe people are just too busy. Maybe there's just so much content to listen to. I mean, there's podcasts. You and I are doing a podcast right now that so many people will probably just never even get around to listening to. Not because they didn't want to, just because there are people making Netflix shows right now that are going to like get advanced in their mental queue past this podcast. I'm having trouble like wrapping my emotions around how do I, and maybe I'm bringing this up to you because I think you would have a really interesting perspective on this. How do I stay motivated in an environment where what used to be 15 minutes of fame has been diluted to 15 seconds? Because that's about the attention that you're going to get from anybody of something that you spent a week or a month making,
I totally agree. I will say this, is that number one is that you should appreciate the journey. You should be doing this not for anybody else, but for yourself. And I will add a little caveat to that, is that if your expectation is to make money from this and to gain a fan base, then yes, you have to make something that everybody else, that at least somebody else likes. But at the end of the day, though, if you are not proud of the work that you're doing and you're appreciating the process of creating it, then why are you doing it? There's so many other things that you could do outside of music to make you a lot more money.
Yeah, that's true.
And the other thing, too, is that music does not have to be your career choice. You can still make music and put it. In fact, I sometimes encourage musicians to do it because it's so stressful. It's like, you don't have to, you could be in a band and not necessarily have the goal of making money or making it big. There's such a small fraction of percent of people that get that huge. Majority don't go anywhere. You're probably, you have a better chance of winning the lotto.
That's a good point. And for people listening, like even this conversation is an example of that. You were kind enough to like push this out an hour or two because I have a day job and like I just couldn't get home until X amount of time. And part of me is kind of okay with working a day job for the rest of my life and continuing to put out content, be it a film, be it the podcast, be it new music or whatever. But because I grew up, I was born in 1981. So by the time I became aware of music with like Madonna or MC Hammer or Def Leppard or whatever, I think it had just been so celebritized that I got it in my head like that's success. That's the end of the rainbow. That's where you want to get. And then with the 90s, where Kurt Cobain like normalized celebrity. He brought it down to like a guy you could just bum a cigarette from on the street corner. And so it wasn't on another planet anymore. It was so much more accessible. And I think that just sort of poisoned my perspective where I'm like, oh, this won't be so hard. I just have to be good at what I do. And then somebody will discover me and then I'll get to go ride that same train. And because that's not at all how it happens, I guess I've just been, in the years since then, like struggling with, and what you're saying is exactly the answer, but like reminding myself that when I get to points where I put out an album that I'm really proud of, and I check the streams like a week in, and it's disheartening because it's like, is it that like this type of rock is over and nobody wants to listen to this, or is it my production value is too low and it like hurts people's ears to do it, or like I just get asking myself all these hyper insecure questions. But to your point, do I listen to it? Yep. Am I proud of it? It's the best I could do with what I had at the moment, and that's
So there you go.
all I have.
So there you go, right? And that's great, and that you should be proud of the music that you put out. So it becomes different when you want to, like, yeah, because then it becomes disheartening when you're trying to make money from it, and that's a very different situation. Just because you could be the best musician in the world, but if you don't know how to market yourself or how to brand yourself properly or get the right kind of attention, it doesn't make a difference at the end of the day. I mean, how many artists have we seen like hit the top that there's so many other people that are way better than them?
That's a good point.
Right? And because it's not about just the production quality, it's not just about the musicianship. It's a lot of other things. It's about, how are they marketed at that point in time? Who did they know in the music industry? Because believe me, that's a big part of it. But
you
and
mentioned
it's also
a while ago about like building a team, and
yeah.
I fantasize about having like a team of people that can take care of different things like cover art or graphic design or whatever. And I've just never accumulated that. Do you have any like tips for people listening that are kind of my seat? Like how do you build a team? Do they have to be in on exactly what you do and just your or is it okay to like just collaboratively have like a loose set of people you work? I don't know. How do you build a team?
A team's different for everybody. So what I would like, it kind of depends. Like sometimes you can have, friends that are able to, to take it over, like certain kinds of responsibilities and so forth, that they really believe in what you're doing and so forth. But that's also a very rare thing to have happen. I mean, you'll have your friends support you, but to be involved is a very totally different thing.
Yeah.
So that will happen too. Otherwise, I mean, look, there's plenty of people out there that their job is to do things for you, but you have to pay them money to do so, like anybody else.
Right.
So,
and then it's a financing issue, which is what holds most musicians back.
Right. It's a financial
anything.
Right. But that's the thing is like, unless you really bring unless you have like already an existing audience and really have something that's already trending or progressing and so forth, most of the time, if you want to build your team out, you're going to have to pay people to do that.
Yeah.
That's just reality. And that includes, but it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be affordable. You can find people that can do amazing cover art that's very affordable out there these days. And same thing is true with production. Like it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg, but while you're building, it's an investment. Again, if you are an artist and looking to make money, you are a business. That's the bottom line.
Out of curiosity, is that at all condoning or encouraging people like treating it like a business and taking out a loan to make an album? Or is that a little too risky, would you think?
It depends. Like if you have a full-time job and realize, okay, if this flops, can I still pay it back the loan? I mean, you have to be responsible about it. Like,
okay.
You can certainly take out a loan, but if you don't have a full-time job and you're banking everything on it, that's probably not a good idea. I would not do that. But if you're like, okay, I have a full-time job and I need a little bit money up front, I don't have it, but I know like over time, like with my consistent paycheck, that I'm able to pay off this loan. Or what I see a lot of artists do is that they have full-time job, or multiple members have full-time jobs, and they each put into a bank account separate for the band to raise enough money to work on the project. I actually see that quite often. Is that they just set aside money from their paycheck, realize that this is an investment into the band. The album may or may not make money, but they, in order to progress, they have to make some sort of a financial investment and seeing what happens. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But looping back to even Netflix, like if you're not consistently putting out content, whether it's music or music videos or anything along those lines, you're not going to get noticed.
Yeah.
So it can be partially financially an investment. It's also a time investment too. And it comes down to both things, right? It's like, is it cost time or is it cost money? I mean, those are the two main factors.
For sure.
The less time it's going to take you, the more money it's going to take. And the more time it takes you, it should be that the less money it's going to take. That should be ultimately what you're looking for there. So if you need somebody to produce it into a studio, it's going to cost you money to do so. If you can self-produce it, it's going to take you more time, but it's going to cost you next to nothing. Like maybe cost you somebody to go ahead and master it.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is smart. Maybe something. Yeah. That should have been what I'd done. Like just do it all myself and then just outsource the mixing and mastering. But yeah, I get very protective. I get very patriarchal over my work, and I just kind of want to like see it all the way to the end myself.
I understand. And it's hard to sometimes give it up. But again, if you want to build out your team, that's, you're trusting other people to do things for you. You're going to have to learn to give some of those, essentially some of the creative control up too. You got to, once you have other people that are involved in your project, same thing true with an artist. If you're even hiring somebody to do artwork for you and so forth, they're going to come with their own ideas. You don't want to tell them how to make it. You want to tell them this is the ideas that I have and the kind of styles and things like that and what I really like and what this album means to me. But then they're going to listen to it and then come up with, what they're envisioning, what they're inspired by, and then bring it back to you. And that's the beauty of it, is that you have all these people then collaborating in what you originally created and then created something, you're completely rounding it out and making something completely
and hopefully
beautiful.
Elevating it for sure.
And elevating it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was looking for a good word. So
in connection to all of this and maybe just pushing it to the back end of the process, something that I'm curious about what you go through as the head of a record label. And you don't have to be specific with names of bands or anything, just to I guess, protect people's egos and what have you, but dropping a band. When you talk, you're talking about the process as far as like time and money and when I have to imagine that at some point the arc starts to drop down the other way, and now it's not a worthwhile investment. Like how has your experience been just parting ways with a project that's just not working well?
I mean, I I'm not gonna lie. There's been some times where things have definitely gone poorly, and where I feel like there are certain things I can certainly do. I mean, I'm human like everybody else, that I could have probably have handled better. I will say that I'm that I'm very fortunate that I would say the majority, if not all, of the artists that I've worked with over the years, I at least have some sort of good standing with. That we at least have some sort of mutual respect with each other. But I would say a lot of times what happens is that they're just like in any relationship revolving, because I can't tell you how many parallels there are to actual other relationships, is that when there's a breakdown in communication and especially a breakdown in expectations, that's usually when the problems arise. So I try to be as straightforward and transparent with my artists as possible, but sometimes that that doesn't always happen. Life happens, and the communication breaks down for one reason or another. And as hard as we try, sometimes that just happens. And when that happens, what ends up happening is that there's this, we're not sure what the artist is doing. The artist is not sure what we're doing. So then we come up with our own heads of what actually is happening here and so forth. And, they're not sure, what the value is. And then there becomes this kind of friction that happens. And, it does happen. And it's very unfortunate what it does. And, there's the best you can do at that point is like, if there's a breakdown in communication like that, is like, see if there's a way to fix it and resolve it. And if not, then, then you just find ways how to, part ways and do it as respectfully as possible. And that's happened too, where we found out just wasn't the right fit. We came into this and we both had different expectations of what we were expecting out of this. And, sometimes it's nobody's fault really at the end, or both of our faults. Yeah. And then, at that point, just like, okay, yeah, we realized that this just was not the right fit for us. And then we just, walk our separate ways.
And with currently carrying like dozens of artists, and I imagine having dozens and dozens more that you're courting and flirting with and have your eye on, do you oftentimes find yourself just spread pretty thin between managing all of that?
Yeah, but also the thing too I've learned over the years is that every artist goes through their different cycles. So some artists are much more active than others, and then some artists will be not as active. So even with our roster that we have, on average, we'll have a handful of them that are extremely active because they're releasing things and they have things going on. And then the other ones may be taking a back seat. They may be taking a hiatus. They may be working on new things, whatever the case might be. So this is why we diversify, is for that exact reason. So we know that artists go through cycles, and because of those reasons, we're protecting ourselves to make sure that we are constantly doing something, constantly are busy. Yeah. So do I feel like I'm spread pretty thin. Yeah, I mean, I run, 820 Records is mostly, I have a team, but it's mostly run by myself. So yes. But at the same token too, is that, doing the podcast and there's all other things that I'm up to, but I always make sure that the artists know at the end of the day that I'm always available to them. And it doesn't matter how active they are. Even, if somebody that I haven't talked to in months calls me up, that's one of our artists, and that we just haven't talked to each other in a while because they are doing their own thing, I will always answer the phone and make sure that I give them my full attention.
Oh, wow.
Because that's important to me. So
awesome.
I never, but I'll let them do their own thing. Like if they're not really being too active right now, it's like, cool, I get it. No pressure whatsoever and so forth. And usually from time to time, I'll check in on them, see how they're doing. But otherwise, they have other things in their life coming up, and, maybe they had a couple band members leave, so they need to restructure. Maybe they're just in writing mode. It's like, cool. All right, do your thing. Go ahead and go into writing mode. Sometimes they're just like, they're not sure if they want to continue on with the project or not, and that's okay too. So I kind of let them figure those things out until they're ready to being active again. And once they're ready to be active again, then we're like, okay, let's get to work.
Wow. I'm curious, inside of all of that busyness and just the way that this company, probably dominates your life. Something that's been interesting for me about doing music, and music sort of led to the podcast, because although I've loved podcasts for a long time and wanted to do it, I figured, well, why don't I start a podcast that I can use to promote the music? So at the beginning of every episode, I'm like, hey, I've got this band, go check it out. But then the podcast ended up leading to this interesting opportunity to make a documentary film, which I did like through the podcast. Like it's presented kind of by the podcast, and it's kind of a podcast film. It's like an interview styled like trip.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was really fun. And then sort of in line with that, I put out my music myself, and I just call it Blayrock Records because that seems pretty fun. But because I consider myself the president of a record company, like I do also work with friends sometimes that do something good, but just don't have the motivation, or maybe just think it's too hard to get on iTunes or Spotify or whatever. So I'll just, release their stuff for them and stuff like that. So my point in saying all of that is I found myself branching out, and the more that I branch out, it gives me opportunities to kind of branch out even more and just do things that were never really 100% on my list of things to do. And I'm curious, within you doing all these things for all these bands and helping them succeed, and maybe even this podcast is an inclusion in what I'm talking about, what have you come across and found yourself having an opportunity to do that you never would have seen yourself doing, that maybe came as a result of all of this?
This podcast, by far.
Yeah.
I hate the sound of my own voice. I am very much an introvert. I never expected this. So, but this was something that I learned. I took public speaking in college and thought that was the last time I was going to do any kind of public speaking. Yeah. And then it came down to, how do I get into conferences? And one of the things I found out that you can get to conferences is speaking there. And I had no idea how it worked, but I had a good friend of mine who showed me the ropes and how to reach out to people and how to present myself and so forth. And so I did it. And the first time I did it, I was so nervous. I forgot, it was like in front of like 50 people, whatever the case was. And I was so nervous. But I got through it. And once I ran through it, I realized I wasn't so bad. So I did it again, and I did it again and again. And then all of a sudden, before I knew it, I was speaking at the NAMM convention. And I was speaking on crowdfunding things to, in general, to help promote my crowdfunding consulting. And all of a sudden, I got a lot more comfortable just speaking in public. But I didn't want to. And then also the other thing too was I knew I wanted to keep my branding up. And so I kind of put myself into those positions. So anytime that I had a chance to talk on the radio too, I would do so. And props to KWSS, because most of the time I speak on their station, and that's because they invite me to come in, or when they're interviewing an artist, they allow me to come along and I get to speak with them too. So that was, for me, that was practice, because I got more comfortable talking on air. I never thought about being a host though. I thought, okay, I can be a guest, I can chill, like it's a lot less pressure, I can have fun with this. And eventually at one point just didn't care. Like some of those things where you don't give anything about like care about anything that's going on. You're like, whatever. I'm just gonna have some fun with this. But it was funny story is that we were doing a guilty pleasure show, and we teamed up with KWSS with their fall fundraiser, so that the whatever money came in for the event went to the station. And Danny Cutler, she suggested to me on, why don't you create a radio spot? And I told her, I said, no, I hate my sound, my voice. I am terrible at this. I'm not a voiceover actor. This is gonna be awful. She's like, no, do it. And I said, fine. So I did one real quick. I had a buddy who has his own podcast, so I actually recorded it with him. He gave me some tips and things to change, and I played it. And I had people like talk to me like saying, "Hey, I really liked your radio spot." I'm like, "Who talks about a radio spot like on the radio? It's a commercial." But I had like I had people like that I saw at shows like, "Hey, you're Mike from 8020, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I liked your radio spot on KWSS." I'm like, "Okay." So I realized, okay, then I guess people really like this spot. So then I thought about it more, and just like you, is that I thought, well, I guess I can create my own podcast. Is that if people really liked me being a host, then why not? Because it opens up so many possibilities. Yeah. And that's why I decided to create the podcast. And just mind you, though, it took me about 1.5 years between the time that I decided I wanted to start a podcast and actually launching it. It would be about 1.5 years.
Well, it sounds like you're doing the smart thing of like, backlogging or I don't know. I guess I'm just too, and maybe this is something you're from all artists. Like, I just want to hurry up and get across the finish line. So when I started this podcast, like it was just week to week, and it's been that way. I mean, from time to time I've interviewed like multiple people in a week. And so I could kind of like pace stuff out. But I imagine when you say you eventually launched it, like you had a bunch of interviews like in the bank, and now you're just now you're just doing things that will appear in the future, and you're just trying to keep that bank full so that you don't have to stress about someday when there's a week that you don't have a podcast to publish.
While we're recording this episode, I'm not joking, I probably still have at least 12 to 14 interviews that I still have not released yet. And I've already released 6 because I got one coming out tomorrow. And and that's not including re-releases. So I've also got permission to re-release content from KWSS from the interviews.
Oh, that's nice.
As well as other podcasts I was interviewed on and so forth. So I got permission from them because I told them, I said, I'll wait. Some of these episodes are like now over 1 year old. So for them, it's like even like a month in podcast land is like an eternity. So it's, so I give them a respectful amount of time when I re-release it, but then I'll mention in the episode, like, this is where it originally aired.
Yeah. I feel like that actually, I'm sweating in nervousness from the way you're expressing that, because when I started my podcast, like, it was just right away. So when I would talk to friends, local musicians and stuff about being on it, usually we would talk and then it would air like the following Monday. I can't imagine going up to somebody and being like, "Hey, you want to be on my podcast?" And they're like, "Great." And I'm like, "Cool. I mean, it's not going to air for 1 year, but if you don't mind sitting down and talking to me," like my self-worth, my self-value issues are like, they're going to walk away. They're not going to want to do that.
Yeah. But I also prioritize. So some episodes, like, it wasn't like in chronological order. So some episodes that I've recorded a couple months ago already aired. And then some episodes I interview with people that were like last year, I have on the back burner, because like some of them, it's also a big part of its relevancy. So I strategize on who I want to release when. So it was very intentional. Literally, I had planned out who exactly would be the first 6 to 8 episodes. And that was very intentional of who those people were, because I wanted to establish ourselves as, a prominent figure in the music industry as a whole. But at the same token, too, wanted to have a diverse list of guests that are different in different fields and different professions in the music industry. And of course, too, I wanted to feature one of our own artists. So that was included in there, too. So that was a very intentional plan. So when I talk about having like over 20 episodes, like half of those episodes, especially the re-releases, that's just there for additional content so that I can release at any point in time. So if I'm finding I don't have an interview to really release right now, or whatever the case is, or just feel like this would be appropriate timing. Like I even have for the NAMM convention coming up, I have the recording of our panel from earlier this year.
Fun.
So my plan
awesome.
is to release the audio of that that entire panel as an episode when it comes back to NAMM time. So finding out the relevancy. I also I interviewed my business partner Zach, who he hasn't been a partner for a long time. He was a partner for 6 months, but I made sure people know that it wasn't just me. I had a business partner.
Yeah.
But I felt it was fitting to make him the 20th episode because at 20.
That's awesome.
So I try to plan things out, accordingly based upon the relevancy of the guest, and then just timing things out accordingly. So, but now I wasn't expecting to have this much of an arsenal. I was not expecting to get this many yeses from people on being on the podcast. So as soon as that happened, I knew, okay, it's like you said, it's like, I know I have something here. Now it's time to hit the ground running because I'm getting all these amazing guests to say yes. And now I have all this content that, I mean, it's a good problem to have. I have all these episodes now that I can work with and release when when it's the best fit. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I haven't had any issues yet, ironically, of anybody saying like, oh, it's going to take 3 months. Fortunately, I haven't experienced that yet, but honestly, if it's a guest that really I try to time it too. So like if it's a guest that has something coming up, I keep that into consideration to try to time it so that helps support whatever it is they come up. So I have things intentionally spotted, but then also leave a lot of flexibility too. So that if I had an interview, let's say in next week and a certain artist that's doing something in next month or whatever the case is, then I'll time it right so that it comes out, because they're giving me their time. The least I can do is try to time it so it helps support them.
Yeah. 100%.
So have you, because I've been checking out your podcast. Is it mostly just you or do you also have guests as well on your podcast?
It's a really good question. If you've been listening since the pandy hit, it's been mostly me. I've been fortunate to get a couple of guests out there, but I like to have guests, and I think that I've both had guests that I've known for a long time, so we can have these kind of really intimate, fun conversations, as well as people that I've never met or people that I'm just a big fan of or whatever. And those are fun for me because it's just a challenge to try to figure out how to like tone down my fanboyness and just to have a conversation with them. But it's actually been a real struggle for the last few months keeping the show going just with solo episodes, partly because I just feel like it's really boring, but partly because I think I just have more to offer in a conversation than I do just me talking out my own thoughts and stuff. So even though I did start it as just a guy, a car, and a podcast, just me driving around talking, once I started doing guests, which was a couple of months in, I was like, this is what the show should be. And now it's just a problem of I book them all myself, and most of them are just people that I know. Or in a case like this, like I have landed a few where I just reached out on social media, just throwing a Hail Mary and got a hit and got to talk to somebody. So
that's how we're doing this interview right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you reach out to us on Instagram and about doing something like this. And that's why you never know. Worst case scenario, they don't respond or say no, but
which happens a ton. Anybody listening that just, gets encouraged by that, I mean, please be encouraged by it, but there is a ton of ghosting, which is something that I hate with my entire soul. Like what you said earlier about like when a band calls me, I want to make time for them, like just warms my heart because I just can't even figure out what about like text messaging. And it's like the more convenient that communication has become, in the sense that what a text message does is it allows you to get to it when you have time. And you'd think that is such a high courtesy to pay to you, for somebody to send you a text message and be like, when you have a minute, hit me back. For someone to be discourteous to that gesture by just not saying anything just makes me want to scrape my own face off of my skull, because I think people actually think that ghosting has no consequences. And
that
all
is 100% wrong.
It is 100% wrong.
100% wrong.
No answer is an answer. It is an
Yes.
answer of disrespect to that person. And so based on that, like, all I'm saying is, yes, there are certainly a lot of times where like my comment just hasn't been responded to, or people have just flat out said no. Like Chris Shiflett, the guitar player of the Foo Fighters, he has a podcast called Walking the Floor that's really good, and I just shooting the moon. Like I sent a email to his website or whatever, and I was like, hey, I'd love to have him on for like the 100th episode or something like that. Like I was like you do, like just playing in the head. And I think 3 months later, his publicist or secretary got back to me and like, hey, thanks for the invite. Like he's just really busy right now, so we can't, but we'll see. And that's
amazing. The fact that they took the time to even respond to you.
Yes,
and
100%.
And that's the thing too, is that and it's funny that you mentioned that. It's like I don't want to necessarily use this as the excuse, but the higher up that somebody is, it's just that they literally, it's now a time thing. It's not even a ghosting thing. It's a time thing where they have so much influx of people asking for their attention that is extremely difficult for them to, they would be spending all day just responding back to people.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So I'm always understanding and respectful of that fact of that the busier that somebody is, that the more I need to respect their time. But at the same token too, is like, yeah, you're right. When people just ghost you in general, and I usually like to give people the benefit of the doubt, because sometimes they see the text message, they like you said, they don't have the time to respond to it now, they'll respond to it later, but now it's no longer a notification, so they completely forgot about it.
Nothing to remind them. Yeah.
Right. So there's those kind of things. Sometimes, I understand, especially with musicians, that they're dealing with either depression or anxiety and things like that too, that prevent them from responding. And I try to be as empathetic about that as possible too. The problem comes into, though, is that when it's continuously happening, and when you're continuously ghosting somebody, that is an issue. And yeah, I do, and I'm not the only one, but we do pay attention to those things. We pay attention to when people ghost us. So because it comes down to, it's not even about a respect thing too, which is part of it, but it's also about a reliability issue too. That if we want to do something with somebody and they're just constantly just not responding back to us and at all, then how can we rely on them that if we want to give them an opportunity, they're going to follow through with that?
Yep.
Because if we're giving somebody else an opportunity, now our reputation's on the line. We need to make sure that we're working with people that we know that if we ask them to ask them for something, that they're going to be able to respond within a reasonable, within reason. So we definitely remember who are the people that don't respond back to us, because generally speaking, those are the people that we are a lot more cautious about doing something with them in the future, because we just don't know. There's that uncertainty that if they're treating us like that now, are they going to still treat us with this if we're working directly together, or we're doing some sort of collaboration together?
100%. And in connection to that, I think one of the reasons why I push myself to push out the music, or put out the music, even if it's not, necessarily of a certain preferred quality, or that I push myself to keep a podcast stocked, even if we're in this weird space of time where it's just harder to get interviews, or that I push myself to conduct and complete and distribute a documentary, even though I'm a director now, but before I did it, I just didn't have any of those skill sets. I think one of the reasons I do all of those things is resume. I want anybody that comes across me that is themselves artistic to look at all of the doings that I'm doing, and to, as a result, realize that if they have an idea, I might be a good guy to talk to about that idea, because maybe I don't have all the skills to get it done, but I do have the time and the ambition. I will give you my attention. I will give you the skills and the talents that I have. And based on that, there's a friend of mine in North Carolina, Ashley Winters. She was a country artist kind of locally, and then she moved to Nashville to give it a real shot. And she put out this album called Country Noir that's really cool. But in touring and just trying to keep it up and some other issues, it just wasn't working out. So she just kind of settled down in Nashville and with her new husband at the time. And then I get a text from her last year sometime where she's like, hey, I wrote this show and we're trying to put together this series, and I wonder if you would be interested in doing the theme song for it. And I'm like, heck yeah. And she's like, the idea that I have is a rock version, a kind of a a heavier or like a faster rock version of REM's Everybody Hurts. And I'm like, I could do that. So I jammed out just a demo and sent it to her. We did a few like mixes to it and she loved it and took it. And then like 3 or 4 months later, I hear back from her and she's like, so as it turns out, the cost of us using that, like the licensing and stuff, is a nightmare. So let's do this, but let's do it differently. And she was like, I have an idea for like an original song. And she basically sent me like a voice memo. And then I just sent her back like a full band demo of how I heard it. And it turned into what she used. There's this show that you can look up on YouTube. It's called PT, Pain and Torture. It's like this office style comedy that's based in a physical therapy office. My whole point in telling you all of that is I have never had any intention to write or perform the theme song for like an episodic, like a serialized show. And yet that show has, I think it's up to like its 15th film festival nomination right now. And it's like getting all sorts of like attention and accolades and stuff. And I sit back and I think, how funny is that my band is attached to this show? So if you go to the IMDb page of PT, Pain and Torture, it says the theme song was performed by Evening the Score, which is my band, because that's how I asked her to like list it. So I guess my point is, like, part of the reason why I push myself to do the things that I do is because I really do want to be productive artistically. And I think the only way to be productive is to be productive. And that sounds really simple, but if you're not doing anything, you won't do anything. And if you do something, the universe is just going to start throwing stuff at you to do. And it won't be anything that you had in mind. But if you turn yourself into a yes man and just start picking up stuff that you're not comfortable with and giving it a shot, like all of a sudden you just have all this crap that you've done. You're like, wow, this is fascinating.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I guarantee you, if it wasn't for the fact that you created a podcast and did the documentary and so forth, that she probably wouldn't have considered reaching out to you.
100%.
People like seeing other people being active.
Mm-hmm.
People like seeing other people doing things.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be like, oh, they're doing something. Ooh, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, that's a pretty cool thing. And because of that reason, that's how you get more noticed. It's not just about releasing music. It's about all those things. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why we do all the things that we do. In 80/20, it's why we do the partnerships that we do. It's why we created the podcast. It's a lot of that is because we're doing things, and we know it's showcasing that we're being active. We're, like you said, we're being productive, and people who also have that aspiration and motivation want to associate themselves with other people who are productive too, and that's how you get yourself noticed.
100%. I have one last question for you.
Yes.
Pronounce your last name for me.
Zimmerlich.
That's what I thought. I was like, it's Zimmerlich. Love it.
Yeah. Wow. You're like, let me tell you, I would say, I'm going to say this, like, this was no pun intended, but about 80% of people get it wrong. Only 20% get it right.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Well, dude, it's been so much fun talking to you. And I was actually just thinking a second ago, it's funny how when we first started talking about doing this, we were talking about like how we wanted to do it. You want to interview me? I'll interview you. How are we going to do it? And I, just in that I didn't have a great answer for that question. I was like, I don't know. Let's just have a conversation, see where it goes. And when I look back on what we've accomplished here, I feel like we both interviewed each other, which was what I was hoping would happen, and it just did. We got everything out, and I don't know. This was just fun. Thanks for being a part of this with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for being on it. Appreciate it.